Hi, everyone. This is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame. Today, we'll be talking about the iconic movie, Enter the Dragon. 50 years ago, this movie came out in the cinemas, and we'll be discussing personal remembrances, reflections, and thoughts about Bruce Lee and Grandmaster Bob Wall. I hope you enjoy it. So I'm here with Grandmaster Chuck Sullivan. Hello, Chuck. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. I'm Grant. How are you?
Excellent, sir. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Bruce Lee, how you met him, what was the times you did interact with him, and what would you think you could take away from Bruce Lee's importance to the martial arts?
Bruce Lee had a profound influence upon me the night I met him. It all happened very quickly. One night, it changed the way I think of things. It really did. He was at the studio with Ed Parker. This was 1961 and 62. Anyhow, in that time frame somewhere. And I was a new black belt. Started in 59, and it took me to 62 to get my black. So this is in 62. And I was moving along very well. I mean, I thought it was in the art. I was getting a good understanding of it. And he was there with Ed Parker, and because at the time somebody had suggested to Bruce that he'd look up Ed Parker because Ed Parker would help him, would be instrumental in getting him into the movies, meeting the right people, being in the right places, and so on. And he did, and he was. Anyhow, this particular thing happened on the night that Ed Parker was teaching the class, and unbeknownst to us, Bruce was in the audience. There's about half a dozen people standing around watching. And after the class was finished, we were walking out from the back with our clothes in our hands, our shoes mainly. And he met us halfway, and he said, "I want to introduce you guys to a hot young martial artist. This is Bruce Lee." He looked like a kid to me, and I said to myself, "Hot young martial? Okay, fine. If Ed Parker thinks he's a hot young martial artist, he's a hot young martial artist. I'll take his word for it." And then Ed got called away to a phone call or something, and he left us. And he left us with Bruce. And Bruce immediately took over the conversation. He was that way. He could do that. And I remember there was Danny Asano, Dave Hebler, myself, maybe one other person. I don't remember if there was any more, but maybe just the three of us. And he started talking. And one of the first things he said was he had just returned from Hong Kong. Well, naturally, our eyes pricked up immediately. Hong Kong, wow, the mecca of kung fu, the mecca of Chinese karate. So we were listening intently, and one of us asked him, "So, what are the martial arts like in Hong Kong?" And he says, "Well, they're mostly, he said, here's his exact quote. He says they're 95% commercial bullshit." And we went, I know, I was shocked. I was literally shocked. And when he said that, it was like, really? Hong Kong? So we asked him, "Well, how about the other guys? What are they like?" And he says, "Well," he says, "half of them are really trying, but they don't know what they're doing." Now I'm like, wow, this is a revelation. And again, we asked, "Well, how about the last 2.5%? What about those guys? What are they like?" Hey, he rolled his eyes. He says, "You round eyes wouldn't even get halfway down the alley before you get killed trying to get to them." He says, "No, they're the real thing, the real deal." I think he called them. But he said they're not a school. They do what they do because they do what they do. And do the words triad or tong mean anything to you? I think that's what he's alluding to. And the conversation went on in general that way. He was showing us things that he was doing in his training, and the kid was amazing. He was. Oh, I found out how old he was. He was 21 years old at that time. I was 30 years old at that time. And 9 years of life experience between 21 and 30, you pick up a lot of stuff. So what he impressed me most with was his martial arts knowledge. I mean, he'd been in it since he was a kid. I'd only been in it 4 years. I was a newbie, really, compared to him, because he'd been in it since he was a child. And the conversation went along for a little while, and all of a sudden he dropped a bomb on us. He said, "Oh, I was watching what you were doing earlier, and I noticed something." He says, "What you were doing," and he showed us a move that we've been doing in the class, one of our more basic moves, and we're like, "Yeah, we do that." He says, "I wonder why were you doing that? Why were we doing that? Because Ed Parker was teaching us, maybe, perhaps. You think? Of course." And we were like, kind of like at a loss for words. Why were we doing it? It was in the class, and he was being weird, being shy. So he says, "Well, I just wanted it because it was wrong." Huh. I remember Dave standing next to me, grew about 3 inches in height, and he kind of looked at me like, tilted his head. And he's like, "Do you want it or should I take it?" I'm too curious for that. I'm more like, with a glance, let's hear what he has to say first before anybody takes him or tries. Anyway, he started to explain to us why what we were doing was a violation of a principle, and you just don't do that. And here we were learning it from Ed Parker, and he explained to us why it was, quote, wrong in his estimation. It was something that shouldn't have been in the system at all. Well, let me say this about that. I could walk into any dojo in the world today, and so could you, Paul, and a lot of the other people watching. All of us, we could walk into any dojo in the world and sit there for an hour and pick out several things that are not good, that are being taught yet today. It's the nature of the art. People are doing things because it's traditional. They never bothered to analyze and say to themselves, "How about this move? Is this really right? Does it adhere to all the good things in the art, or is there really something wrong with it? Let's take a real hard look at it." Well, I'd never done that. I had never done that. When I began karate, Ed Parker knew everything. I knew nothing. Therefore, I took what he said as gospel. I accepted it wholeheartedly. Good, bad, or ugly. It didn't make any difference. Well, that night, I was driving home. This is just a few minutes later. Really. Ed Parker came out of the office, and the conversation was over. And I'm thinking about this. And I'm saying to myself, how come this punk can come in here and he can do that and I can't? I can't do that. How come? I don't understand this. I'm thinking this to myself. I'm getting a little irritated with myself driving home, thinking he picked something out that was obviously wrong and we should have been learning, but we were. And all of a sudden I said to myself, I think I said it out loud. I will often do that. How do you know you can't do it? You never tried. You never tried. I never tried to analyze one thing that Ed Parker was teaching us because he was teaching it to us. It had to be right. No, it didn't. No, it did not. There are little things here and there that seeped into the system and stayed there, even though they weren't great. I can name a couple of them right off, but I'm not going to. And they're still doing it today. And they're still teaching that move today. And they shouldn't be. Bruce and I became good friends through Dan and Asano. He didn't know it and I didn't know it, but Danny was a conduit between Bruce and I. I was a barber at the time. I cut hair. That's what I did for a living for all those years. I haven't done that for 28 years, but anyway, I did that for those years. And Danny was coming into my shop, but every other week, that's about as often as you got a haircut in those days. Every other week, he was there for a haircut. So he and I got to compare notes every other week. And I would tell him what we started in our school, and he would say, "That's amazing, because we just started that." And then he would go back to Bruce, and he would tell Bruce certain things, and then he would tell us what they're doing, and I'd say, "I can't believe it. That's what we're doing now." He one time I remember Danny saying, "I've never known any two guys that were more on the same wavelength than you and Bruce." He says, "You guys are amazing me." He says, the things that you're both doing that are innovative." And he says, "I swear you're talking to one another, but I know you're not." Anyway, that was I got a kick out of it. I told that to Linda Lee, Bruce's widow. She was married to Tom Bleecker at the time, and we're out to dinner. And I told her, I said, the thing that Danny said, he said, because Danny had told him what we were doing, and Bruce was getting it all. And he said, "Ah, he is in the water, but he is not yet swimming." I thought that was great. I thought that was a great play on words. He is in the water, but not yet swimming. I love that. And yeah, Linda said, wait, ho, ho, ho. Bruce said you were in the water? And I said, well, I don't know. I wasn't there. Danny said, Danny told me that's what he said. And she says, that's the best compliment I ever heard Bruce give. Bruce Lee was quite an individual. He really was. He was way, way, way ahead of his years. And we always were on great terms, but it was always very light. Well, what I learned that evening about our system did not dissuade me from continuing on with it. It's a great system. It is. I had seen by this time all of the other systems, all of them. Shotokan, Ichiro, Shituru, Gojuru, Tangsuro, Taekwondo, everything in the world, had been presented to us by that time. And I never felt the need or the desire to go from Kenpo to something else. I picked some things up from here and there. I stole from the best. There are moves that we do that are strictly Bruce's moves, but I never had to study with him. I stole them from him. I saw what he was doing, and I said, "That's great. I like that. I could do that. I could teach that," and I do, and I will. That's the effect that Bruce Lee had upon my whole being. I don't take anything for granted anymore. I don't take anything because somebody knowledgeable about a subject more than I am tells me that it's so. I just, if I really want to know, I check it out, or I'll analyze it, I'll break it down, and I thank Bruce for that and the ability to do that.
So, Grandmaster Sullivan, what is the impact and the contribution of Bruce Lee here 50 years later?
Well, Bruce had a profound influence upon the martial arts movies, of course, because prior to that, all you had was Hong Kong schlock. It was just pretty much ridiculous fighting, and Bruce, what he brought into it was an element of realism. I'll never forget the one scene where the door opens and about 18 guys rush out. He turns and runs. I thought that was great because that's exactly what he would have done. That many people coming out, he'd got out of there. He would pick and choose his fights better than that. The mixed martial arts, and it started with kickboxing, of course, and then mixed martial arts. Bruce wouldn't have had much of a problem with that. He never did compete. We never saw the man compete. He did a demonstration freestyle match, full contact, because they were padded up at one of the internationals. But that's for actual competition, no. But Bruce had a philosophy about fighting, what it is, and his philosophy was generally speaking, do what you have to do to get the hell out of there. And Ed Parker was asked one time to define Kenpo succinctly. This was done by a by a LA Times columnist, and he said, "Can you describe your art succinctly?" And Ed Parker thought about it for a beat. And he says, yes, it's organized, scientific, dirty fighting. That's Kenpo. And that was Bruce Lee's art. Organized, scientific, dirty fighting. He would do whatever he had to do to get out of there first. Now, all the things that he would have done are all the things that are illegal in MMA and kickboxing. You can't put a thumb in somebody's eye. You can't bite his ear off. You can't knee him in the groin. You can't. All the things that you cannot do, he would have done first. When he came along, the art was mean and lean. And then it became a little more gentrified and a little more gentrified. And then they start putting rules onto it, make it a sport. And it became a lot less than when it started out. And I missed that. So we went back to the early days and we stayed there. I want to say in conclusion, thank you, Bruce. Thank you for everything you've done, for everything you said, for everything you've written, for all the movies. It's a shame that it couldn't have gone on for a lot longer. And congratulations on being inducted into the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame.
Hello, this is Ted Sumner. I just wanted to say a few words about a couple of the luminaries of the martial arts. Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, you might ask. Hasn't everything been said about him? Well, sure. Every other cover of Black Belt magazine features Bruce Lee. But how Bruce Lee affected me personally, well, that's another matter altogether, which I would like to just bring forth a few points here. I started with the Tracy brothers in 1963. That was after they had moved from Los Angeles in '62 and opened their school in San Francisco. Bruce Lee was a regular visitor at that time to their Ocean Avenue school. He was always trying to develop more power off that front punch, and spent time working with the Tracys and some of their students, going over techniques, teaching, learning. But then in '63, late '63, they opened a school in San Jose, and that was where I joined. Bruce had never visited the school in San Jose. In 1964, I missed the internationals. I was just a little bit too young. But everybody came back talking about Bruce Lee and his demonstration there. The 1-inch punch, the 2-finger push-up. And people were practicing that. The Tracys talked about Bruce Lee a lot, though he was not terribly famous at that time, probably more notorious within Chinatown because of his defiance of the dictate that they not teach non-Chinese any of the Kung Fu arts. And he defied that, and the wrath of the Tongs came down on him. In 1966, he got the part as Kato, and boy, that changed things. New ritual was established. All my martial arts friends, we'd get together and watch the Green Hornet, hoping to see a good fight scene with Bruce. The camera work in that show was terrible, but still we could make out what was going on, and had a lot of fun with it. Now, the one time that I did meet him was in 1966, 67 at a tournament in San Francisco. He arrived, and of course, everybody gathered around him. He was going through a round table, teaching some technique, and Al Tracy told me, he says, well, that's Bruce Lee right over there. So I immediately waded into the group and worked my way right up front and started asking questions. Pretty soon I was firing question after question, and Bruce spoke to me, the one and only time, and I will never forget his words. I remember them fondly. He pushed me back and said, "Shut up, kid. I'm talking here." A lot of people ask me, "Well, what did you do?" Well, I shut up. What else could I do? Bruce then went to China and became an international star. But what was it that he meant to me personally? Well, Bruce, he normalized, I'd have to say, the martial arts. Many of my friends who were Japanese, things were still stinging a bit from World War II, and they were often referred to in derogatory terms. But suddenly, after Bruce Lee, they were no longer Japanese, they were Chinese. They received respectability, and everybody assumed they knew the martial arts, which most did. They usually, first and second generation Japanese, started judo at the Buddhist temple when they were about 10 years old. But Bruce then also normalized Chinese philosophy, a lot of terms he used, be like water. Another one was, don't fear the man who practices 10,000 kicks one time, fear the man who practices one kick 10,000 times. And another one was, you will become what you think. And my favorite was, hit hard, hit fast, hit first. But I must say, he defined the classic martial artist for us. He was not big and overpowering. He was small, lean, fit, fast. He was brash, but not arrogant. He was pretentious, but always polite. And he was audacious, but not reckless. That's what Bruce Lee left me. And those are my memories of him. Another luminary that I'd like to discuss here, who this one probably is not discussed enough. The great Bob Wall. Bob and I were both born in San Jose, California, 10 years apart. He's a little older than me. And strangely enough, we attended and graduated from the same high school, James Lick. There's got to be some law against that. I don't know how we got over that. But Bruce then moved south and went to Southern California, where he became friends with Chuck Norris, studied his Tang Soo Do system. Bob then became quite famous for being Bruce Lee's fighting partner in his 3 big movies. But he also appeared in, I think it was 14 episodes of Chuck Norris's show, Walker, Texas Ranger. One thing about Bob, when he ukied for you, he would take it. He would stand in there. He never flinched. One time Bruce Lee told him, he says, "I want to hit you hard because I want this scene to look realistic." And he wound up breaking one of Bob's ribs. But that didn't matter to Bob. He still hung in there. Another thing about Bob that he taught us was loyalty. Bob was one of those people that if he decided you were his friend, that was that. You had a friend for life. Not only that, but you had a friend who was absolutely loyal. When Steven Seagal started making some derogatory remarks about Chuck Norris, Bob went nuts. He challenged Seagal. He went public with his remarks. He would not tolerate him disrespecting his friend. Ultimately, he was joined by others who felt the same way, and they became the Sinister Six, and then ultimately the Dirty Dozen made the cover of Black Belt magazine. But one thing about Bob that he taught us was loyalty, devotion, and fidelity. Another great man who's not talked about enough in the martial arts. Bob recently passed away at the age of 82, and he'll be missed.
Hi, everyone. This is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame, and we are discussing the 2023 nominees. I'm very excited today because we'll have a discussion with a personal friend of the late, great Grandmaster Bob Wall. I hope you enjoyed this discussion as we get an insight into the man himself and what he stood for and the influence he had in the martial arts. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome my good friend to a Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame member, Grandmaster Casey Jones. Hello, Casey. How are you, sir? Casey, give us an insight into your personal relationship with Bob Wall.
You know, Bob Wall, I met Bob Wall many years ago. I was actually in high school. And actually, I was introduced to him by a good friend of mine, and, rest in peace, Howard Jackson. Howard Jackson and I used to work together for a while, and Howard had mentioned, hey, man, let me introduce you to this guy. And, we went out to Woodland Hills, and he introduced me, and, we became friends. He was very, Bob's full of energy. Bob was one of the happiest guys and full of a lot of love. He always wanted to hug you and shake hands. And if you've ever met him in person, he had some of the brightest eyes, the most brightening and welcoming eyes, and this big, huge smile. He was always genuine if he loved you and cared about you. And Bob had the other side too. If he didn't like you, he let you know. He was the honest guy. He's the type of person that you'd want to meet to interface with and share some martial knowledge with. One of the times I went by to see Bob, he was working out with this guy in the backyard, and a little Asian dude. One of the martial arts guys, and they're working out. Lillian opened the door and let me in, and said Bob was working at the time. And so I walked in and I sat down, watched him for a minute. And when they finished up, Bob walked out with this little guy, and they're toweling down, and Bob points and says, "You know who this guy is?" And I looked at him and I'm like, "Well, not really." And so the guy smiled at me and stuff, and reached out and welcomed and gave me a welcoming handshake. Say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Bruce." Like, okay, how are you doing, Bruce? In my head, I have no idea who this guy was. And so Bob says, this is have you ever seen Green Hornet? And I thought, like, yeah, I've seen a couple Green Hornet episodes. That little guy said, "Oh, you're that guy. Oh, okay. Good to meet you." So he leaves afterwards and goes on. And that was like my one meeting with Bruce Lee. And that was the one time I saw them working out. But I knew at that time that both Bob and Bruce were genuine friends. They hugged, they laughed, they giggled. They, just like two kids together. So I knew that they had a great relationship just on that one meeting.
What was Bob's feelings of Bruce? Did he ever express them to you?
Bob's feelings on Bruce were of love and respect. And, I remember him talking to him, and I asked, "Are you taking lessons from him, or are you giving him lessons?" And he says, "No, it's nothing like that. We just have, it's simpatico." That's the word he used. We give, it's a yin and yang. We give and get from each other. And since this guy really likes me a lot, he likes me a lot. And what Bob told me at the time was, one of the reasons he likes working with me is because he could work with Bob at almost full power. And Bob was one of the only people that never complained about getting hit by Bruce, because my understanding is Bruce would light you up. And that was one of the reasons that, and Bob also told me that was one of the reasons that Bruce selected Bob for the movies, because Bob helped him make things look more realistic. And when we watch the movies, we see most of the movies look extremely realistic. We see these guys getting hit, seeing punched and kicked, and Bob was one of those guys that could take a kick. I remember him talking about this one scene in Enter the Dragon, and obviously this is years later, but this one scene in Enter the Dragon, and I guess everybody remembers it as he played O'Hara. He gets kicked, during the tournament, and he gets kicked and he gets launched into a group of cheers and people who catches him. Well, it turns out, like there was one of the stuntmen in the background, had a broken arm, and they picked the set up and they did it all over again. But it was the fact that Bruce really did kick Bob. He did launch him one, and Bob's one that jumps up. He's a tough Irishman, He got up, he brushed himself off and said, "Come on, let's go do it again." And he had faith, he had belief. He had love for Bruce, and I think they had it for each other.
Did he ever share with you any personal stories relating to Enter the Dragon, either the filming it, developing it, or the choreography?
There was a time that Bob shared some of the background stuff that happened. Well, he's actually shared with me on multiple occasions, little sections of his memory of being on set and shooting. And there are a couple things that he shared that, I don't know if I want to reshare again. We talked about Jim Kelly and Jim Kelly going there. And I'm only still telling the story third party. This is directly from Bob, but he said he dealt with Jim Kelly, and, Jim he got sick, and there were certain things he couldn't eat. And he was just trying to get himself acclimated into the set and shooting, and was sick several times, couldn't show up. The other thing that I remember him doing was, or talking about, was the fact that him working with Bruce. So on the side, he said Bruce would help him set up different scenes, the choreography portion of it during the fight scenes. And, there's so many different things were fired at me. I can't remember everything, but he had a good time on the set.
What was the biggest impact Bob Wall had on you and your martial arts career?
Bob made a huge impact on my martial arts, and it had nothing to do with punching, kicking, or grabbing, but it was the fact that he was able to introduce me to a larger martial arts family. He introduced me to the Danny Asantos, the Eric Lees, the Chuck Norrises, the Gene LaBelle, and so on. I would keep on listing people if I said it. And each one of those individuals I had a chance or opportunity to meet, have discussions with, share the science, but not just the science, but we shared personal life. We talked about our kids, our environment that we lived in, sometimes even workouts and dietary science. So there was an influx of martial artists that I saw or met and dealt with while I was around Bob. And Bob brought that to me. And that's the part that I appreciate the most. He also talked about this tough Irish guy in him, which I respected, because I understand what it's like to fight. I know it's like to be in the ring. I understand how to survive on the street as well. And Bob brought that to me. Bob gave me his insight and his feelings, and I sort of adopted those to move forward. I've known the Wall family, well, since the late 60s, probably 68, 69, in that range there. Both Lillian and both of his daughters. Don't interface so much with the daughters, but more so with Lillian. As a matter of fact, Lillian is still a contact of mine. I talk to Lillian at least twice a month, and we have little conversations, constantly text each other, make sure I keep track of where she is and how she's doing, and make sure there's nothing that she needs. And if so, within my power, I told her I've always assist her.
I had the great pleasure, Casey, to meet Bob, and it was a wonderful conversation. We developed an immediate friendship, and the best part about it, he solidified a bond with my son, George.
Yeah.
As you know, he didn't have any boys, so this was sort of important to him. And I did the interview with him, a Zoom meeting, over a year ago, and about a year and a half ago, and he came on and we talked about his life and his impact and whatnot. I told him, I think he and Bruce Lee were like, when you think about Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. That kind of relationship, but truly they loved one another, but the conflict was the dark side. And his influence was so important in cinema that even the outlaw Josie Wales, Clint Eastwood character, if you look at it, he had the scar over the same eye, looked identical to what Bob had in Enter the Dragon. But Bob Wall was the real deal. That's the difference between that and movie characters. We went out to visit him, and it was supposed to only be an hour. 3 hours later, I'm exhausted, and he's still going strong with George on the trampoline and all that. And he always insisted that if I was to come, I had to bring my son. And we had planned to meet a year ago, but sadly he passed away. And I was hoping to have him at last year's event. I'm so happy that you can speak so eloquently about him. But I'm going to share something that I have. It is a beautiful thing, a testimony to Mr. Wall. And I'll share it with you. It's called The Who's Who in the Martial Arts here. And this, my friends, is a first edition by Bob Wall, Karate, Kung Fu, Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, 1975. Now, most people would say when you made Bob Wall, he was very over the top, very bombastic, outgoing, loud, whatever. But that was called confidence. I don't think it was arrogance. I think it was confidence because he had proven it many times over, enough to even the most iconic martial artist at least in cinema for sure. And I believe his influence and impact in the martial arts still resonates today because it was a way of looking forward. And so with Bob, he writes in here in this book, and I share this with you, and it says, the dedication. This book is dedicated to my fantastic family whose love and encouragement and understanding enhanced my involvement in the study of martial arts. And he says to his beautiful wife, Lillian, to his daughter, Shanna, to his father and mother, and a few others. And he says here on page, in the prefix, he says, my purpose in writing this first of its kind book are many, but most importantly, I nurture the idea so that the premier positive contributes to the development of all of the martial arts would have their efforts recognized. If that was not the influence for me after the fact for the Hall of Fame, I'm so proud that I found that reading that to you before we started.
Oh man,
Isn't that great?
Yes, beautiful. I love it.
If you look at the book, for those naysayers out there, this first edition, 1975, there's no picture of Bob Wall. There's no bio in here of Bob Wall. No, Bob Wall did this. He put these people in here that there's roughly, I think there's over 100 of them in here. Mm-hmm. There's no Bob Wall. What does that tell you about Bob Wall?
Yeah.
As a person.
Yeah.
And that's the key. In the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame, it encompasses over 14 system styles and disciplines. Last year, we recognized Brandon Lee. This year, we recognized Bruce Lee. And we're going to also recognize Grandmaster Bob Wall. Your final thoughts, Casey, before we close.
You know, in my final thoughts with regards to Bob, and again, he was a loving individual, kind and charitable. And he was a guy that was willing to give his shirt off your back. And he's done it with me literally a few times. He's given me a shirt he had on because I liked it. But I will miss Bob Wall physically. However, in mind and spirit, he will always be with me. He'll be with us. He's always going to be O'Hara out there to the masses. He has spread and infected us all with the Bob Wall culture and the ability to drive and move forward. And I thank Bob for that. I thank the Wall family and his wife and his two daughters. And heck, without Bob Wall, there would have been no real Bruce Lee, right? Bruce Lee and Bob were one. They were partners to the end.
Well said. As the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame will remember and reflect in June of 2023, Remember, folks, the Hall of Fame is a celebration of greatness. And I'm very pleased and honored to have one of our members, Casey Jones, and his input on our Grandmaster inductee, Mr. Bob Wall. With no further ado, thank you very much. Salute.
Peace and love.